accept that it's possible that it's dishonest to say that you can make the kinds of adjustments that are undoubtedly required to be made without affecting social welfare. I don't accept that. So I'll just come straight to it and be blunt about it. In circumstances where the government has engaged in an adjustment in this budget of the order of £6 billion, we know, if I'm reading the detail of the proposals correctly, we know that the proportion of that adjustment that is attributable to social welfare, including to the social welfare payments, first of all, the people of working age reductions and also child benefit, together amount to about £500 million. Now, I don't accept the proposition of Senator Boyle or others that it isn't possible or wasn't possible for the government to avoid affecting the least well-off in our society and to avoid reducing welfare payments by 4% and still bring in a credible proposition and a credible budget. I don't accept the proposition of Senator Boyle. I think he's wrong in that. And he's right to say that we'll have an opportunity to debate these issues in the course of the general election campaign, which can't come soon enough. And I wouldn't mind asking Senator Boyle, through you, Alaska Healy, when he thinks that's going to come, because we have all sorts of rumours about extensions and about target dates moving and slipping and everything else, and all kinds of proposals being referred to in relation to referendums being held the same day as the general election and so on. And I just wonder what in fact is going on, and perhaps the leader of the Green Party might clarify that at some point when he gets an opportunity. Alaska Healy, the Minister stated, I want to take the starting point for the few comments I want to make about the budget statement from what the Minister himself said in the penultimate paragraph of his speech, because I thought it was quite striking. He said, and I quote, "This is not just a budget to increase taxes and reduce expenditure. In our present economic circumstances, we have to do far more than this," he said. And he goes on to say, "It is also, and crucially, a wide-ranging plan which points the way first to securing stability in our public finances and economy, which will be followed by sustainable economic and employment growth in the years ahead, and which will also be underpinned by reforms in key areas that will boost the performance of our private and public sectors," unquote. Well, Alaska Healy, with all due respect, you could have fooled me. And I think you could have fooled anybody who reads the speech or heard the speech yesterday, or indeed reads the documentation, because this is entirely a document which and entirely a measure which increases taxes and reduces expenditure. Can somebody point to something else in here? Can somebody point to a plan? Where's the plan? Where is it? Just refer me to it. It isn't in the speech. It isn't in the bigger document. It doesn't exist. It just isn't there. And there's no point in the Minister trying to persuade us that it's there and to tell us that it's there when it ain't. Because we have a look ourselves and we can't find it. And I think it comes down to what Senator Boyle said in the course of his remarks when he used the word wish. And I think he, in fairness to him, in good faith, he said he wishes that there should be growth. And he wishes that the Irish economy's fortunes would improve under whichever government has to be in charge of its stewardship. And that's fair enough that he should wish those things. And I share his good wishes, I must say, on behalf of the whole country, that things would improve. But for politicians, more is expected of politicians than the expressions of wishes. Because I think he's right when he says that, he's right when he says we're not beyond salvation. I don't believe actually that anything in human affairs is beyond salvation. I don't think at all that it's beyond our ingenuity as a people to turn around the appalling situation that we're in. I absolutely would share the optimism of others, but that's not to say that it isn't a huge task and a hugely difficult task, but it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that we can actually again gain control of our affairs and in fact develop our country and expand our country and improve our country and the welfare of our people if we take the right decisions. But wishing it to happen won't make it happen, Alaska Healy. And there's no point in just talking about wishing. And the difficulty, the first and fundamental difficulty that we in the Labour Party have with this budget is that, remind the House, it's only 6 weeks since the Department of Finance itself, not the Labour Party or not anybody else, the Department of Finance itself was saying that the correct order of adjustment in the 2011 budget was £4.5 billion. That's a very short time ago, 6 weeks ago. that the Department of Finance took this view. 4.5 billion is what the Department of Finance thought was because they were exercising a judgment, Alaska Hurley. Everybody knows that if you take money out of the economy in this radical way, that you will cause a deflationary impact. Government don't talk about that. They accept that it's true if it's put to them, but they tend not to want to remind us of that. But we all know that. Whether it was 6 billion, 4.5 billion, 3 billion or 1 billion, we know that it would have that impact. So why 4.5 billion? Or why 6, people might say? Where do you get the figure? These are numbers that go beyond people's heads, over people's heads sometimes. Because you have to exercise a judgment. You have to say, look, this will have a negative impact. So how can we minimise that impact? And how can we come back to the wishing? How can we ensure that by our actions, not relying on what might or we hope will happen internationally and international change and so turn up for the better, but how can we control the possibility of growth in the Irish economy? What steps can we take, limited as they may be, what steps can we take to ensure that we open up and we free up the possibility for growth in our economy? And it seems to me that to go for an adjustment of 6 billion, of that order, in such a dramatic way and in such a brutal way, can only have the effect of very severely deflating and very severely undermining, if not clobbering, the Irish economy and any prospects that it has for growth next year. And there's no point in government ministers or our colleagues here or TDs saying that a figure of 4.5 billion doesn't have credibility, I heard somebody saying in relation to a criticism of the Labour Party. It didn't have credibility when it was the Department of Finance's own figure only 6 weeks ago. So let's understand that what we're doing is we're talking about figures, we're seeking to exercise a judgment as to what the correct figure ought to be. And why did it get to 6 billion from 4.5 billion? How did it happen? It's very clear what happened, and it's been admitted what happened. Because essentially what the government saw was, they saw the chaos on the markets, the extraordinary difficulty we had in borrowing at any kind of a sustainable level, and they said, we'll throw them the figure of 6 billion in the hope that this would be good for the optics, that this would persuade people that they're serious in Dublin, they're really taking this on board, by God, they're jumping into action, they're going to tear the, if I may say so, Alaska Hurley, backside out of their economy, and they really mean business. They're not talking about 4.5, by God, they're talking about 6. It was this sort of notion of the optics, how it would look. Now, how do you think it looks to people who are facing a reduction in welfare payments? How does it feel to them? What are the optics of the situation like for the people who actually have to sustain the effect of this much larger adjustment? Because we are, and I know the Minister Brady and others will understand that this affects, because she must see it herself. We all see it ourselves in terms of the daily lives of people in constituencies and in the country. But we can't turn our backs on that. And there's a lot of lip service about fairness in this budget. And I have to say that it is no more than lip service. It is not a fair budget. No budget can be, it seems to me, fair. That in fact, I mean, this notion that in order to be fair, we take something from everybody. But there are quite a lot of people in our society who can't afford to have anything taken from them. That's the reality. Let's just be blunt about it. It's an academic argument to say, well, we demonstrate fairness if we take some here and more there and so on and so forth. But there are some people that in fact can't actually manage to have anything taken from them, given what they've had to sustain in the last 2 years, or more. So I think that's the basis upon which we should be debating this. And there's nothing, as I say, there is nothing in relation to steps that this government can take. I have to say that I agree with Senator Ross, unfortunately, that this budget is in fact the result of a negotiating rout. Because this is not, despite what the Minister says, Minister Manzer says in his speech, the notion that, first of all, we had the blueprint, the 4-year plan. And then we had the IMF, the EU, the Commission, the ECB come in, and rather than them sitting down as they do in other countries and negotiating a memorandum of understanding, we said, oh, we have one that we prepared earlier. What do you think of that? Have a look at that. Oh, and they said, oh, right, you've all this work done. That's very interesting. We'll have all that. That's exactly what we were thinking. That's exactly what we had in mind. Pull the other one. Does anybody believe that there wasn't close collaboration between the government and the other parties, ultimately to the Memorandum of Understanding, that there wasn't collaboration between those parties and those groups prior to the Memorandum of Understanding being agreed. No one buys that. You know, this is part of this kind of narrative where it goes right back to the start of this crisis, where people are told things by government ministers that are just, it's like Alice in Wonderland. Words mean what I say they mean. We understand what's happening. People can read, people can understand what's going on. And they don't buy this notion that this budget is anything other than, as Senator Ross said, unfortunately, the product of and the result of an incredibly weak position that the Irish government rendered itself into by virtue of the total collapse, catastrophic collapse and failure of its banking policy. I mean, how many times in this chamber in the last 2 years did we listen to the government and its supporters say that the reason why we had to pump money into the banking system, the reason for NAM, the reason for all of the steps that were taken was so that the banking system would function again and lend into the Irish economy and lend into the real economy? They've stopped saying that now. I haven't heard them saying that in weeks, because they can't keep a straight face and say it, because it hasn't happened. There isn't the first sign of it happening. Where is the credit from the banking system? Where is the restoration of credit? The absolute lifeblood of business. Where is it? It ain't there. So even, most especially on that test, the government's own test that it put in place for the success of its banking policy, that credit would become available again, didn't occur. It has been a huge mistake. The word mistake doesn't even begin to describe the disaster of the government's banking policy, internationally recognised as such. Utter disaster, pinning the fortunes of the Irish state and the Irish taxpayer onto the banking system and the collapse of the banking system. A complete and abject and total failure of policy on the part of the government. And this budget, as others have said, comes at the end of an extraordinary period. It is a bookend, I think, historically. And when people look back, they'll see this budget and they'll see this week as the bookend of a really shocking period in our history in terms of this. And Senator McSharry can talk all he wants about his bullet points of good things that happened within the last 10 years. And good things did happen. Infrastructure certainly has been improved. But if that hadn't happened, I mean, at least there is something. I mean, wouldn't it be extraordinary if there was nothing to point to for the last 10 years or 12 years? Why would it come as a surprise that we at least are able to point to something in terms of the road system? And he mentioned special needs assistance. My God, if that wasn't there, it would be worse than a failure. It would be something of a completely different character. So of course there have been gains in relation to infrastructure. But the problem is the central failure of the government throughout that period was a manifest failure to provide for the sustainable funding of infrastructure, for example, and of public services more generally in our economy. They ignored that. Key responsibility of a government, not just to find money this year to pay the bills, but to look to the future of the country, to look to the future of all of our children and of the next generations, and to put in place a sustainable basis for funding the kind of public services we wanted. That was completely reneged upon. I mean, that was totally set aside, it seems to me, in relation to what, in particular, I have to say, the Fianna Fáil party and the view they took of the economy and of the future. And I have to say that they did, if I may say so, did in fact, and it's not an unfair criticism of the Fianna Fáil party, that they looked to the fortunes of that party. They looked to the fortunes of that party rather than to the fortunes of the country. That is precisely what they did do. And that's why we've reached the stage we've reached today. And no amount of pleading on the part of the government, in particular the Fianna Fáil party, that nobody saw this coming and nobody knew and nobody told them. And why didn't people tell them? And why were the opposition making demands for improvement in services and improvement in schools and improvement in health services? As if it wasn't a responsibility of any opposition in any period of history to look for an improvement in services. But the government is a gatekeeper. The government is responsible for the public finances, and the government is responsible not just for the public finances today, but also for the future. And I have to say, Alaska O'Hearley, what they've done in this budget does not, it does not fill anybody, could not fill anybody with any confidence that they have taken a serious view in relation to, and a convincing view and a persuasive approach to securing the future of our country, the future of our economy in any kind of sustainable way.